My name is Inger, and today I will be demonstrating how to make Apricot-Habanero Jelly. During my demonstration, I'm going to be talking about the importance of utilizing a tested recipe for safety. We're going to talk about the tools required to make the jelly. We'll also be talking about processing times and adjusting for elevation or altitude. And lastly, I'll be talking a little bit about how to cool your product and store it on the shelf. Anytime you are canning, whether it be pressure canning or boiling water bath canning, it is important to use a tested and approved recipe. You can find these types of recipes inside books such as the Ball canning books or the Guide to Preserving, also manufactured or produced by Ball. Today's recipe, the habanero jelly, is going to come from the all-new Ball book of canning and preserving. The importance of using a tested recipe is to ensure that you are producing a product that is safe for consumption. We want to make sure that we have the ratio of our ingredients correct. We want to make sure that the acidity is correct. And having proper acidity means that we're providing an environment where bacteria, mold, and yeast don't grow. Before starting your recipe, you should go ahead and gather all the ingredients necessary and have them pre-measured out so that you don't run into a situation where you're missing a cup of sugar or something like that after you've already gotten the cooking process started. We want to make sure that we have not only the right measurement of ingredients, but also having quality ingredients that are fresh and free without blemish. I have some fresh habaneros here, a fresh red bell pepper, and a fresh red onion. The other product that's on our table here is the pectin. And pectin comes in both a dry and wet form. In this particular recipe, it's calling for the liquid pectin, and it's important to recognize that when looking at your recipes, you really want to make sure that you're using the appropriate type of pectin because they are not interchangeable. Now that our fresh ingredients have been chopped and measured out, I want to talk to you a little bit about tools you'll need. The first thing you're going to need is a large enough vessel or pot to accommodate the size of the jars as far as the height for your processing. So you'll need a pot that has a lid. You will also need a pot that has some sort of a wrap inside that will enable you to keep the jars off of the base and suspended so the water can completely circulate around the jars. When filling your pot of water, it's important that the water level is at least 1 to 2 inches above the jars that you'll be processing. Now that the pot is filled with water, I went ahead and put it on the stove and adjusted the temperature or the flame to come to a simmer but not a boil. Let's talk about some of the other equipment you'll need in doing this particular project for the jelly. The first you're going to need is a mason jar. The mason jar is a half pint for the recipe. I'll need 6 of these. If you look at your mason jar, you want to inspect the jar for any imperfections or cracks, and if there's something wrong with the jar, you're going to want to set that aside and get another jar. The jars for this particular recipe need to be washed with soapy water and dried. They do not need to be sterilized. And then the other part of the jar that you'll be needing is a metal ring and the lid. Some other tools that you'll need for this project is going to be a funnel because the jelly is going to be very hot and we want to make sure that we get it into the jars and we don't touch it. You're also going to need some jar grabbers, and these are so that after you fill your jar and screw on the lid, you're going to go ahead and pick up the jar and place it into the simmering water so that you don't get scalded from the hot water. You're also going to need a ladle. That is going to be so you can scoop out the hot jelly from the pot into the jars. And then lastly, you're going to need a bubbler. The bubbling tool is actually multifunctioned, and the first part of the function is you'll notice that there is a graduated stepwise measurement tool on this side, and each of these particular measurements are 1/4 of an inch. So when you fill your jar, you're going to be able to put the measurement tool along the top, and that first graduated mark, which is where we're going to put it at 1/4 of an inch, is going to measure where you're going to fill your jelly. The second part of the tool is that it also removes bubbles from your jar and your ingredients. You will also need a stainless steel or enamel pot that is large enough to make the jelly. The jelly, you'll notice, starts to bubble up, so we'll want to have it large enough and tall enough so that it doesn't bubble over. I'm going to bring the vinegar and the apricots to a boil, and then I'm going to add the sugar and the rest of the ingredients. Okay, I'm going to add the red onion, the red bell pepper, and the habanero. Our ingredients has come to a boil, so I'm going to pour in the sugar, and I need to stir continuously until it comes to a roaring boil that cannot be stirred down. Okay, it's really starting to boil. This is a rolling boil that cannot be stirred down, so I'm going to go ahead and put the pectin in. It's been 1 minute, so I'm going to turn off the heat and remove it from the burner. Okay, I'm going to remove one of the jars from the warm water. I'm just going to gently pour out the water. So what we'll do is we'll take our hot jar and we'll go ahead and place the hot jelly inside the jar. And since the jar is hot, I'm just going to go ahead and hold it with my hand warmers. And I'm going to fill the jar to a head space of 1/4 inch. Now we're going to take our bubbler and we're just going to run it along the edge and make sure that all of the bubbles are out of the jelly, and then we can measure if it has a 1/4 head space. After we fill the jar, we are going to clean the top of the rim, making sure there isn't anything sticky on there that would prevent the compound seal from adhering to the glass. And then we're going to take one of our jar lids and put it on top, and then we're going to take the ring and just screw it down to finger tight. Finger tight means once the jar lid grips, we're just going to give it an additional little turn. And then we're going to take the jar lifter and place it into the simmering water. And we're just going to repeat this process until all 6 jelly jars are full. Now that our pot has a rolling boil, I'm going to go ahead and put the lid on and set my timer for 15 minutes. It's been 15 minutes since the water bath canner has been processing the jars, so I have turned off the heat. And the next step is just to remove the lid and let stand for 5 minutes. While the jars are cooling, let's talk a little bit about altitude and processing time. If we think about elevation, water boils at a lower temperature, so we need to extend the period of time that the jars are processing. If you're at sea level, water is going to boil at 212. But here in Idaho, it's going to boil at a lower temperature, which is why we need to adjust the processing time by an additional 5 minutes. The other reason for making sure that we adjust the time is we want to make sure that any bacteria, mold, or yeast is going to be destroyed during the processing time. It's important to lift the jars straight up. It's okay if there's a little bit of water on top, and you're just going to place it on top of the tray. You don't want to place your jar on top of a cold surface like a countertop, because that could cause the jar to break. Now that the 6 jars are removed from the water bath, we're going to leave them undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours. If for some reason the jar did not seal, you have a couple of choices. You can reprocess it, put it into a fresh jar and lid, put it back in the water boiler, and do the process again. Or you could go ahead and just put that in the refrigerator and enjoy that. The last step in the canning process is to wash off your jars. Make sure that there isn't any food or debris that's left on the edge. The reason you want to wash your jars is to make sure that you don't have any smell, that you're not attracting any ants or anything like that in your cabinet. And it's best to store your jars below 95 degrees. Optimal temperature is between 50 and 70 degrees, and that will allow your product to retain its quality and its taste. In summary, we really talked about the need to use a tested recipe when doing any level of canning. We also talked about using correct measurements and fresh ingredients in your canning to make sure that you have a good quality of product at the end. We discussed the number of tools that you need, as well as the altitude and processing times. And then lastly, we talked about cleaning up the jars and storing. So today we made Apricot-Habanero Jelly, and I hope that you found the demonstration to be informative and fun. Thank you for your time.